presenting on the role of film adaptations of children's books. So, I mainly chose this topic because I wanted to look into why adaptations are made and how the book and movie affect each other. So, throughout this presentation, I'm kind of going to go over general trends between the book and the movie and talk about how a good and bad adaptation affects us as readers. So, going into why we make adaptations in the first place, you'll see that like it's pretty popular to choose a book or a series and turn it into a movie. And it's pretty interesting to note because a lot of these movies actually end up winning awards. And if you look at some statistics, for the 2020 Oscar nominations, there were seven films that were originally books. And these seven films have 37 nominations in 16 different categories. And according to 1992 statistics, 85% of all Oscar-winning Best Pictures are adaptations. So clearly, like, there's a lot of really good movie adaptations of books, and they're winning Oscars, so that's really cool. And another reason why that people will choose to adapt a book for a movie is because the movie has a pretty much built-in audience already. And like you'll see this in a lot of cases. So there was actually a survey done in 2001 by NPD Fun World, and they found that 79% of kids and 71% of adults who read Harry Potter were actually planning on seeing the first Harry Potter movie. So there's your built-in audience right there. And the book also benefits from increased publicity due to the marketing that the movie does. And another example would be the Polar Express, which normally sells around 200,000 copies every winter holiday season. But after the movie was released in 2004, that same winter, it sold 3 million copies, which is quite a jump. So from like a pretty monetary or economic standpoint, I guess, it seems like a really good relationship from the with the book and the movie, and both sides benefit. But we're not really here to just talk about the market. We're readers too. So we're also going to look at the role of movies from a reader standpoint. So the main role of the movie is really to bring the text to life and kind of have this new form of the text. And for the most part, I will say movies are a little bit restricting. And there's a number of reasons behind this. So they'll take out parts of the plot or simplify the plot because they have to kind of meet time constraints. Like you can't always fit the entire book within 2 hours. And sometimes they do this to appeal to a broader audience. If the plot is a little complex, they might simplify a little bit because they want to draw in people who haven't read the book yet. And movies can also limit your imagination. And by this, I mean they could kind of replace or ruin an image of a character or a scene. Like you might have imagined someone to look a certain way, and then you see the movie and it's not at all what you expected, or vice versa, you see the movie and now you can't imagine it any other way. And I'm going to talk about that too later on. So it's because of all these reasons, really, why you'll hear a lot of people say that the book is always better than the movie. And really quickly, before we go into the two movies I want to talk about, I wanted to mention why this all matters, real quick. So basically, books, especially children's books, I feel they can play a really big role in our lives and influence the development of our identities. And by this, I'm basically saying if we like a book, it really does become a part of us. So, like when you have this book that's a part of you and now you have a movie about it, like this is kind of bound to influence you because it's related to this book. And so, and on why these adaptations matter, I believe that a good movie can really enforce these ideas that the book brings to you and make the book an even bigger part of your life and kind of like create like this positive feedback loop between you, the book, and the movie. But you shouldn't always discredit a bad movie. It still has a role, it's just a little bit different. And I would argue that a bad movie can point out what truly matters to you from the book. And so now we're going to look at two examples of this. We're going to look into a good adaptation and a bad adaptation from my point of view. And so there's going to be some personal elements, and this is because the two books I'm going to talk about were both pretty big parts of my life and definitely influenced who I am today. And the first book is going to be Harry Potter, which we all read in class together, so I don't need to go over the plot really. Um, okay, cool. So I'm considering Harry Potter a pretty successful adaptation. Um, Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, I would like to have a little disclaimer. I actually watched the movies before I read the books. The movies were introduced to me at a pretty young age, probably around the time when I couldn't really read. So, it was bound to happen. Don't crucify me, please, but like I think this is a pretty interesting perspective to also look at this from too. So that's also why I bring it up. Um, so looking at even just like the critics rating or like audience rating, these averages are me basically estimating between both critics on Rotten Tomatoes and the audience score. And so it fared pretty well on Rotten Tomatoes, and for the most part, like it stayed pretty true to the book series. Like the core of the plot was for the most part preserved. Like the main ideas were there. Um, and so the movies actually introduced me to the books because again, I watched the movies first. And the books became a pretty big part of my life after I read them. And I tried and kind of failed to mold my personality after the Gryffindors because I wanted to be a protagonist, but like five identity crises later, I realized I'm actually a Hufflepuff slash Ravenclaw. So, there's that. Like sometimes you really get into a book and you really want to relate to the main characters, but later on you realize you don't always have to be the Gryffindor of the story. You can be a Hufflepuff, and that's fine. Sorry, that was my little squirrel, I guess. Um, so as a side effect, I will say because I like watch the movies first, it's hard for me to picture the characters as anyone besides the actors. And I say this because I'm really into fan art community, and like I really love all artistic interpretations of characters. Like I appreciate it all. But looking at fan art of Harry Potter, it's like hard for me to like instantly recognize as Harry Potter in a way because I always see Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter and I always see Tom Felton as Draco Malfoy. And in a way, I feel like having Draco Malfoy be Tom Felton looking that cute on the screen, like I had a crush on him when I was a kid, and I feel like it made me like sympathize more with his character. So like definitely like the movie really influenced how I view these characters. And in a way it like restricted my imagination because now I like can't imagine them any other way. So but this is all coming from someone who watched movies first, so I do acknowledge that I'm a little bit more forgiving when it comes to like what the movies missed and like what was like omitted from the plot. So I do understand that a lot of things in the book didn't make it, and a lot of fans would still view this as like a pretty bad adaptation because they're missing certain parts of the book. And that actually brings me to my next case, which is Percy Jackson. Um, so I actually read Percy Jackson around the time they originally released, like really early. Like I know they were released around like 2006. I don't remember exactly when I read them, but I remember very vividly my brother telling me, "You have to read these books because everyone has to read it for summer reading when you get into middle school, and you'll be a cool kid if you read it." And there were a few things wrong with his argument. Starting with the fact that I was in like first grade, I could like barely read and like comprehend. Like, okay, I can read, but like I don't know if I could comprehend everything. And by the time I was in middle school, it wasn't a summer reading book anymore because everyone read it. But either way, these books were a really big part of my life, even bigger than Harry Potter. And I used to build my personality around these books. Like I wanted to be as loyal as Percy or as smart as Annabeth. I wanted like their friendship with somebody. Like I was always like seeking that kind of dynamic. It was just a really big part of my life, and I really resonate with the characters. So listen to me geek out about them for the next few minutes. Or actually, not geek out. Listen to me criticize the movie about them for the next few minutes. So I'm bringing this up as a bad adaptation of the book, and it fared pretty poorly both in box office and with the readers. Real quick, actually, if you didn't read The Lightning Thief, the main premise is that you have a group of 12-year-olds, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover, and they're sent on a quest to retrieve Zeus's master lightning bolt, which is like his big symbol of power. And Percy's the son of Poseidon, Annabeth is the daughter of Athena, and Grover is a satyr. It's like very like based in Greek mythology. So for one, they completely changed up the plot of The Lightning Thief and cut the series short at the Sea of Monsters. And by that, I mean they took events from the last book, The Last Olympian, and put them in the Sea of Monsters movie. So when I say this is a bad adaptation, this is a bad adaptation to the point where Rick Riordan, the author, refuses to watch these movies. And he tweeted that like this is basically his life's work going through a meat grinder. So that's how like bad the adaptation was really. Like seriously, it's like you can't really call it an adaptation sometimes. Um, so my boy Rick and I, we have many grievances over these movies, but it's interesting to kind of look at what exactly fans disliked about the movie. So these are kind of like the first things that come to mind is like you asked me what I felt was like the worst changes they made. Starting with they aged up the characters. So they were 12 in the books and 16 in the movies. And age was kind of important to the plot because in the final prophecy, Percy turned 16 and there was like a whole, series of events that were like linked to him turning 16. In the movies, they kind of just changed it to like him turning 21, but it doesn't have the same ring. I don't know. It wasn't super important to the plot. The age thing was mainly important because the books were aimed at 9 to 12-year-olds, and Percy kind of like the books were released a year apart, and each year, like Percy would be a year older in like the next book. So in a sense, the readers were growing with the characters, and the movie just completely gets rid of this relationship between the readers and the characters almost because like they kind of get rid of the whole age factor in a sense. The other thing is Annabeth was brunette, and this is a kind of a big slap in the face because she was described as blonde, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty minor change. It's hair color, but people were still mad that Hermione didn't really have bushy hair, and like her hair was always like pretty well kept in the movies. And in the same like sense, like having Annabeth be brunette was, a little weird, like seeing that because we always pictured her as this blonde girl. And I thought it was really clever because Rick makes all of the children of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, blonde, and it kind of like turns the dumb blonde stereotype like upside down. So I thought that was really clever, and it wasn't in the movie anymore. And the biggest thing is the fact that they changed the quest. So, like, there was still a quest, but like the events that happened along the quest were all pretty much changed. And so in the books, the characters are really struggling to get from the East Coast to the West Coast because they had to go like by ground. They couldn't fly because Zeus was Lord of the Skies and he could zap Percy out of the sky because he was mad at him. Um, but in the movie, they're given Persephone's pearls and this map that essentially guides them across the country. So they're kind of like handed the answer, which didn't really sit that well with me. And Rick also commented that the pearls aren't, first of all, they aren't a part of Greek mythology. And he felt that it was a pretty cheap plot device. And he wrote all this in an email to the producers about the movie. So my beef with that is without the struggles, you don't really get as much character development. And you don't get to see how Percy and Annabeth end up forming this really strong bond. So a lot of people like that was really important to them. Like Percy and Annabeth's friendship was like something that they strived for. And like now you're kind of like taking away this big part of like how it developed. And it kind of relates back to Harry Potter. Like fans also picked out parts of the plot like if you ask them why don't you like the movies, they'll pick out like certain parts of the plot that were really important to them. So the first things that would come to their mind really showed like what you valued most from the books. And it's kind of like the idea that you don't really know what you have until it's gone. So you had it in the books, the movies took it away, and now you realize, hey, this is like really important to you. And it's also in a sense part of who you are. So with some conclusions to wrap it up, basically, movie adaptations can affect your relationship to the books and have an effect on your identity. And this is because this mental world that we create when we read can have a pretty great effect on our childhood and identity. And we tend to disagree with movies because we're seeing someone else's interpretation. Or in like unique cases like mine with Harry Potter, it can kind of lock you into a specific interpretation. And a good adaptation can positively influence your relationship to the books. Meanwhile, a bad adaptation or different interpretations can really bring to light what you valued most from the books originally. So that's how I feel what the role of film adaptations of books are. And these are my citations. Thank you so much for watching.